welcome. My name is Tracy Lounsbury. I am a retirement wealth analyst at Up North Retirement. And today, what we're going to talk about is the 4% rule. And we're going to get into some down and dirty details here. And what I really hope you get from this video is not that there is one way to skin a cat, but there are multiple ways. And we're going to look at some data and some history to really drive the point home. Okay. So let me go ahead and share what we're going to be talking about today when it comes to the 4% rule. Okay. So I know this is a lot, and I know it can be overwhelming a bit, but what we're going to drive home is, data, historical data. So this is an Excel sheet that we modeled to show you what the 4% rule has or would have done if you would have followed it dating back to 2000. Now, some people may think that, hey, you're picking 2000 for this. What about 1997 or 8? What about starting with a couple good years? What we're trying to do is we're trying to look at things conservatively because we don't know what the future holds. We don't know if we're going to go into another great bull market. So let's look at it as, hey, we might have a couple bad years. And that's exactly how 2000, 2001, and 2002 started. So what is the 4% rule? So essentially what the 4% rule is it's if you had a portfolio that was structured with 50% in bonds and 50% into the S&P 500, specifically following here the U.S. aggregate bond. So it's the U.S. Barclays aggregate bond, which we do have history and returns on, as well as obviously the S&P 500. So what we're using here is we're using an S&P 500 ETF. It's the closest thing you can get to investing directly into the S&P. So what if you had 50% of your money in one and 50% of your money in the other, and you started taking 4% out? Now, the 4% rule is not linear. So you do not start to withdraw 4% and that is it. You take 4% plus inflation. So they want to make sure that we're adjusting for inflation, which we have. So if you look on this chart, what you'll see is far left here is the date. So from 2000 to 2023, currently recording this late January 2024. We're assuming here that you start with $1 million. We have our return average, which I'm going to show you how we calculated that. We have our fee, our expense ratio of that fund, I believe is somewhere around 0.35, 0.38. It's already calculated in. So this would be more of like an advisor fee. And then we have the return after the fee. We have the withdrawal being used, 4% rule, and then your end value. Okay. So let's talk about how we got the return. It's not as simple as some of you may think. What you have to do is you have to take the returns from each sector, so the S&P 500 and the bond aggregate. You have to then convert them into decimals, which we did. I'm showing you this math for those of you who may be numbers whizzes or advisors. You then have to add 1 to that. You have to multiply the return decimals together, and then you have to square root it. You then subtract your 1, and it yields you your average. Okay? So that's how we got to the average. So if we look at that, the average over the 23-year period is 5.95%. So following the 4% rule, if you would have put $1 million in, took 40 grand out, adjusted for inflation over time, got you in the income range of 70,000 over the 23-year period. That's with some pretty big inflation adjusted numbers today. Now, there's a lot of argument behind that. There's a lot of argument behind actual inflation versus inflation on paper. And I do agree. Do I really think that 40,000 would have, or 70,000 today would have got you the same 40 grand back in 2000? No, I don't think that. I think you probably would have needed a little bit more than that. But there's too many arguments behind it that we're just going to go with what it is on paper. So if you would have followed the 50-50 split in your $1 million, you would have essentially been down about 11%. Okay. So you would have taken out $1.261 million in income and really not touched your principal much. Okay. The 4% rule is really designed to maintain principal and make sure you don't run out of money. Now, let me show you how a I'm going to call it an advisory fee because this, or just sometimes it could be any fee because this is kind of like the golden standard for a lot of retirees. I know 6% doesn't seem like a lot, but I could show you a 9% portfolio that ran out of money. Maybe we'll do that. So if you put an advisory fee on here, let's just say the advisor is charging you 0.05. So 50 basis points fee. Look how much it affected that final value. A 50 basis points fee, costs you a couple $100,000. And the average advisor fee is 1% or more. Look how much that costs you. We're almost in the ballpark of halving your total value at the end there. Okay. It's just something to be aware of. And I'm not against fees. I'm very for fee-based advisors. You have to have one. Okay. Well, I guess you don't have to, but they help a lot. Okay. Especially with understanding if you're not somebody who invest very much or you're not as savvy on that side, they're really going to be able to help you not just get good returns or consistent returns, but also they help with planning in general. Okay. So it's not that a 1% fee is bad or beyond average. It's definitely average, but just be aware of what fees can do inside of a portfolio. Okay. What we want to do is we want to compare. Oh, before we continue, let's compare that. Let's go to the S&P 500 total return. Okay. If we go ahead and we take this withdrawal, and let's just say, well, Tracy, I know I can beat that average return. Well, let's use the golden standard, which is the S&P 500. Let's remove that fee and let's go ahead and do that. Okay. So if we go in here and we say, all right, I'm gonna copy this. I'm gonna go over to the S&P, and I'm gonna put that in. Well, actually, if you were invested in a 8.61% average, which is what the S&P has returned as an average, took out the exact same amount. Let's take a look here with no fee. And then what we're going to do is we're going to say no fee on this side. You'd be down a significant amount. So $890,000 versus, if you're just in the S&P, 4.46%. Well, why is that? Why is it that I had an average of 8.61%? This only had an average of 5.95, and I'm getting smoked. Well, it has to do with sequence of return. It's because you're taking massive losses compared to having a buffer, which would be an asset like a bond or an annuity or some type of fixed interest to help buffer those losses. Sometimes it's not about the gains that are important. It's about not experiencing the losses. Okay. So now that we have that out of the way, and essentially this is kind of like the golden standard, not very many people beat the S&P. Okay. Now that that's out of the way, what would it look like if you compared this to an annuity? And I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to compare it to what I call a buffered annuity. Okay. So what we use as a buffer is we use fixed indexed annuities. Why? Because they have the zero floor we're looking for. And a lot of them have upside potential. And that upside potential comes in the form of a cap or a participation rate. A cap meaning, and we're going to stick to the S&P here. The S&P goes up. You go up with it up to a cap. Okay. The S&P goes up 50% in this, or I'm sorry, 50, we're going to call it 5%. You're going to get the full 5 in this annuity here. Okay. This is an annuity based on a 10% cap. But if the S&P goes up 30%, you only go up 10. So you get a piece of it, not all of it. This one that we're specifically looking at here is feeless, meaning we are not looking at any internal fees other than what's called a surrender charge, which you wouldn't pay unless you were surrendering the contract. Okay. So we're going to use the exact same methodology here. We're going to have 50% into bonds and 50% into equities and then 50% into an annuity. Okay. So 500,000 here, then 500,000, but we're going to use a little bit different withdrawal strategy. Okay. In a buffered withdrawal strategy, what you're going to do is when you're in this red zone in retirement, the red zone meaning, hey, I'm in my first 5 years, my first 10 years, market's kind of funky. It's really important to not make realized losses in your portfolio, meaning this S&P 500 or equities return. A realized loss is, hey, it goes down and then you take money out. Well, you just realized that loss. So what you do is you buffer it. You buffer it by leveraging something that's not going to go down when the market goes down. So in this case, if you look at this return column, in these first 3 years, it saw zeros. Actually, these have the ability for you to use fixed accounts. I'm just going to say that you weren't using them in this case, so you just returned 0. Well, in this case, 0 is kind of your hero. because what you're going to do is you're going to start taking withdrawals. You're going to start taking that 4% rule out of the annuity instead. Okay. And so you're going to do that essentially until you've depleted the account. In this case, it's because we just had a bad run, a bad red zone, a bad first 10 years. So what did that mean? Well, it means that it allowed your equities portfolio to not have to be handicapped. And when it's not handicapped, it's able to recover and grow, and essentially over a period of time can be very powerful. So we have about 15 years, and then now we got to start tapping into our equities. Because we were able to let it recover, it went from 500,000 down to 312, 400, down to 357 in 08, and then started recovering nicely. We were able to start taking those withdrawals, and then overall, in this case, yielded a $1.6 million net after 2023 or 23 years. Now, there are some assumptions here, assuming that you can have an annuity that has a 10% cap for 23 years. Well, I don't believe that exists. It's probably going to change after the surrender period if it's a good annuity. Okay. But we got you out of the red zone, right? And you can always repurchase annuities at different rates. This is just, there are some assumptions here, but at face value, it definitely does work. Okay. Not to mention, this isn't even the type of annuity that most people use. Most people will use an income annuity. Well, Tracy, what do you mean an income annuity? Let's go and take a look. Now, an income annuity is something that gives you a lifetime income, and the growth really doesn't matter in it. Essentially, it's designed to give you a check for the rest of your life, and that check is per dollar higher than the 4% rule, right? But it's a linear withdrawal. So I had to make a couple assumptions here, and what we're going to do is we're going to use a linear 50,000 per year. 50,000 per year, actually total returns about 1.2 million in income versus the other side was about 1.26. Okay. So we're 60,000 down. It's not going to make a big deal in the scheme of things here. Okay. So let's just say you had a linear 50,000, about the exact same withdrawal other than that, maybe last year, 2023. Okay. So how much do I have to put into an annuity to get 50,000 for the rest of my life? So this is a contractual guarantee, and here's what it looks like. It takes about 630 grand. Okay, and this is assuming the age of 65, okay, on a single annuitant. So at 65, you put 630 in, okay, and then it's going to give you 50,000. Now, there are some assumptions here on how it's going to grow, but that doesn't matter, okay? The growth inside of this account, actually what I'm assuming here is 2.26%. I'm using a 5% S&P cap. That's probably about right in these accounts. They don't grow very much, okay? But it doesn't really matter because you see this column here, that's going to be the guaranteed check that's coming in every single year or month to you, okay? If you broke it down into 12 payments. If you look here, you see that actually your account went red in 14 years, meaning that the annuity had no more account value. That's okay because they're still going to cut you a check for the rest of your life. When you start taking $50,000 out of a $630,000 account, that's about an 8% withdrawal. It's going to go to zero. There's almost no equities that will ever keep up with that. So essentially, you're not sacrificing it, you're just earmarking it for income. You look at this as more of an internal rate of return. Well, how do you calculate how it's actually making a return? Well, 2.26% sucks. Yes, but you took out $1.2 million over the course of 23 years. So you essentially doubled the money that you put in there. That's an internal rate of return, okay? But remember, it's not all about what this is doing. It's about what this is allowing the other account to do. Let's take a look. Now let's imagine that the other 370,000, okay? The other 370 was in equities and you never had to touch it because you just essentially solved, other than, I don't know, your last few years. Let's just assume your last few years here, you took out $15,000. That is to make up the, we'll say 30. That's to make up the 60,000 difference from the annuity to the 4% rule. Okay. So put that in there just to apples here. So you didn't have to touch this for a long time. And that's really powerful. Compounding interest is extremely powerful. You now have a real 8.61% average. We're not even putting a fee in here because you go buy an ETF and not really need it to be managed essentially. But if you have an advisor, they can do a great job. Okay. And look at what the fruit here yields. So essentially, you're getting the exact same amount of income as you would with the 4% rule using the S&P and the bond. Only your net after 23 years is 1.792 million. So comparing it to the bond aggregate with no fee, your net was quite a bit less, about $1 million difference there. And it's because of the fact that you're solving income without having to touch equities, and that's a powerful tool. Now, Tracy, I don't want to have that much money left over. That's fine. Then spend it because you already have your structure. You already have the foundation of your structure built, right? That's the entire point behind an annuity, right? So the point of all this is not to say that an S&P in the bond aggregate or a bond account is any worse or better than a buffered annuity, just a simple annuity for growth that you're just buffering, withdrawal strategy, or an income annuity. It's not to say that it's better or worse. It's to say that it's different. You're always going to give up something. So what are you going to give up to purchase an annuity? What you're going to give up to purchase an annuity is going to be time and returns. Okay. So when I purchase an income annuity, I'm not going to get very much return, and I'm going to give up time of that asset. Time meaning I'm not really going to be able to touch it for a period of time. Sometimes it's a month, sometimes it's years, depending on how long you want to defer it. The more you defer it, the higher income you get. What about in a buffered annuity or an indexed annuity without an income rider? Okay. You're going to give up growth potential, right? And then you're also going to give up the guarantee of an income rider. But then if I don't do an annuity, what am I giving up? Well, that means you're going to give up some guarantees and you're going to give up risk. You're going to give up, essentially, you could be giving up fees as well. Okay. There's more fees that come out when you have all of your money in an equities portfolio than you would inside of like a buffered annuity, because the fee comes in a different form. The fee comes in the form of, that cap, right? It's almost like a fee because you don't really get the upside potential over that cap, but it's not directly coming out of your account value. And that's what's important to understand. And how insurance agents get paid don't come out of your account value directly. It comes in the form of benefits. Okay. So we're looking at it on paper exactly how it is today. These rates all change. So what's important to understand is make that informed decision for yourself, and consult the right people that know enough about both sides. Okay. So God bless you guys. Hope that was informative, and have a great day.